structural change on two dimensions, and I'll talk about this. One is a stock change with household debt, as you were saying, needing to be lower. The other is a flow change where incomes earned by large swaths of the developed world are stagnating in real terms. And this is both a political and economic impact on outcomes. Helicopter money can give you a one-time sort of adrenaline shot on both of these scores, but it doesn't address the persistent problem of stagnant income. So what is the solution there?
Well, that's my reasoning is along your lines as well, but I take it slightly further in a theoretical way. When I do my modelling of financial crises, which is what let me see the crisis coming in the first place before it happened, one of the outcomes of that is, first of all, there's a tendency for private debt to grow faster than GDP and lead to a crisis. It's both a theoretical possibility, and you look at the empirical record, that's been the history of American capitalism right from the 1800s on. So that tendency to have too much private debt building up over time is always there. Secondly, when that happens, if the rising level of debt is associated very directly with a fall in the income of workers. In other words, even though when I model this, I model it without workers borrowing money at all, even if they're not borrowing and just the capitalists are borrowing to finance investment, all legitimate stuff, no Ponzi scheme stuff, it ends up being transmitted through the economy so that the workers get lower wages directly proportional to the increase in income going to the banking sector. So those two tendencies are there all the time. And I think we have to, ultimately, if we're going to have a stable version of capitalism, we have to use something like helicopter money, not as a one-off as you're saying, but as a continuous process to correct that income imbalance and the tendency to take on too much private debt.
And so, in terms of solutions there, I think you're getting at something. I know a lot of people talk about debt jubilees. You talk about that, or wholesale debt reduction schemes as patently unfair. Some people talk about them because it rewards reckless behavior, they would say, and is therefore that reckless behavior is likely to occur. How do you get on that problem? What's your view there?
Well, I agree with that argument, and what I've said all the time is you can't simply rescue the debtors in our modern society, because if you go back to when Jubilees used to happen, the old-fashioned Jubilees, then you had normally it was agricultural small landholders who couldn't pay the debts they got caught up in with usurious rates of interest from moneylenders and from large landowners. They ended up being debt slaves. They ended up being almost the majority of the population. And when you freed them from the debt slavery, you liberated everybody to go back to be smallholders again, and the system would go through the same process. And it was built into the structure of society. So forgiving the debtors made sense. There were no savers in that sense back in those days. What we have now is banks that create the money, but individuals you can break into either debtors or savers. Now, if you just simply have the debtors off, you're quite right. You encourage the behaviour that got them into debt in the first place, which was normally gambling on rising asset markets and a Ponzi scheme. My idea of a modern debt jubilee is use the state's capacity to create money, because just like the banks can create money by lending more than they get back in repayments, the government can create money by spending more than it gets back in tax payments, running a deficit, and this whole idea of quantitative easing for the people is about having effectively a combined fiscal and monetary policy. Use that and pay it directly to everybody per capita, independent of whether they're debtors or savers, and independent of their income levels as well. That necessarily means there's no advantage to being in debt beforehand, because if you're in debt beforehand, you're forced to pay your debt down. You don't get any spending capacity out of that money. But if you weren't in debt, you get a cash injection. So that's an even-handed way of doing it. It doesn't benefit one group over the other, and it also helps you stimulate the economy, because the major danger about a crisis like we're in now is when you reduce debt in the ordinary way of either going bankrupt or paying your debts off, you reduce demand and reduce income and cause the economy to continue spiralling down. This would enable us to reduce the private debt and actually stimulate the economy at the same time.
Well, it's good. I want to sustainably boost both wages and productivity for lower income workers in developed economies.
One major way is reduce that level of private debt, and my good friend Michael Hudson makes this case very well as well. He says a major reason why wages in America are high compared to the rest of the world is not that the living standards are that much higher for American workers. clearly the ones we're talking about are living close to poverty. It's because they can't afford to be paid less because of the debt servicing costs they've got and the rent they've got to pay, which also reflects the high asset prices that have been caused by the debt in the first place. So a very politically and economically effective way to make America competitive again is to reduce that level of private debt. That's a major factor causing this current dislocation. Once you've done that, you have a whole range of other factors that are also going to help stimulate the economy. More demand coming through for a start, because you're not putting all the money into paying off debt to the banking sector, which doesn't generate the demand in the way that our own internal commercial relations do. But you've now got a whole range of technological factors that mean it's possible to bring production back onshore. The advantages, the older days advantages of outsourcing and producing everything in China and exporting back don't have the same advantages anymore when we're talking about 3D printing, growth of robotics, much more direct supply chains and so on. So this is a good time to be shifting away from what really was a failed policy for the majority that only benefited the very wealthy minority and, of course, a lot of workers in China.